I'm joined today by famed prosecutor Vincent Bugliosi, New York Times best-selling author, also involved with the film The Prosecution of an American President, which is based on Mr. Bugliosi's book, The Prosecution of George W. Bush for Murder. Let's start there if we can. What is the case against George W. Bush?
Well, let me just say, David, that I want to thank you off the top for having me on your show.
Pleasure.
My new DVD, it's called The Prosecution of an American President, is based on my book. Actually, it was a best-selling book, The Prosecution of George W. Bush for Murder. And then the DVD adds several new things, most importantly on President Obama. David, before I get into the evidence against Bush, evidence that proves beyond all reasonable doubt that he took the nation to war in Iraq on a lie, under false pretenses, and therefore, under the law, David, he's guilty of murder for the deaths of 4,500 young American soldiers who lost their lives in Iraq fighting his war. Not your war, David, or my war, or America's war, but George Bush's war. But before we do that, I want to discuss 2 points that, to my knowledge, David, are being greatly overlooked by the media. Number one, and let's make this clear, George Bush is responsible for the existence of ISIS. Where do you think these barbarians came from? They were members of a group called Al-Qaeda in Iraq. Now, that's the Al-Qaeda group that came to Iraq in 2003 after, let's underline the word after Bush's invasion of the country to fight the American forces. So there was no Al-Qaeda in Iraq, nor ISIS, before Bush invaded Iraq. So Bush is not only responsible, David, for the deaths of 4,500 young American soldiers who died during the Iraq War, and over 500,000 deaths of innocent Iraqi men, women, children, and babies who died horrible deaths because of the war. He's also responsible, and no one seems to be talking about it, for the unspeakable atrocities being committed by ISIS. He gave birth to ISIS. And yet, where do you hear this, David? Maybe you are, but where do you hear this in America?
No, you're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. We have no corporate media coverage that, as more than as an aside, is mentioning the responsibility of the Bush administration in creating this kind of power vacuum in which ISIS came to power. It's being discussed almost not at all.
Yeah. What we do hear about Bush is that he's become fascinated with the lovely pastime of painting. His approval rating used to be very low. Now it's exceeding President Obama's, apparently. And I read an article in the New York Times not too long ago that his friends are saying that they've never seen him happier. Now, the second point is this, and then I'll get into the evidence against Bush. We know the carnage and the evidence going on in Iraq today, not just today, I mean every hour, every minute. The second thing I want to say is, why in the world isn't anyone pointing out the fact that prior to Bush's invasion, Iraq, believe it or not, was a very peaceful nation, 10 times more peaceful than the United States, had an extremely low crime rate. The Shiites and the Sunnis were getting along. They may not have liked each other, but they were getting along. Today they're slaughtering each other.
And I think it's important to make sure that, sometimes, and I happen to agree with you completely, when someone makes the case you're making now, you're not saying that Saddam Hussein was a great guy or that he was not a brutal dictator.
I'm just going to add that now.
Yeah, but you're just saying that the reality was that Iraq did not pose a direct threat to other countries.
That's right. Yeah, you're absolutely right, David. There's no question Hussein was a brutal dictator who would not tolerate dissent. But as far as I could determine, David, and this is something that I'm very cognizant of because I've asked questions about it, I've read about it, as far as I can determine, if you minded your own business in Iraq and then try to overthrow him like the Shiites did in 1991 after the Persian Gulf War, you could just about do what you wanted to in Iraq. For instance, let me give you a couple of examples. There's freedom of religion. If you were a Christian, you worshipped in a Christian church. Now, of course, they're burning the churches and murdering Christians. If you were a gay, you went to a gay bar at night. If you were a woman, they didn't discriminate against you. You could go to the University of Baghdad, one of the finest universities in the Mideast, become a doctor or a lawyer. And once a woman got those degrees and practiced medicine or law, she went to work in a dress. She didn't have a burqa with something covering her face, and they had a cell phone. Baghdad was being compared to a modern-day Dallas, Texas. So Bush invaded Iraq with his outrageous, fraudulent war, David, and virtually destroyed the entire nation, as well as killing over 500,000 people, yet he is still walking free among us. He's gotten away with murder. The horror this man caused is incalculable. I mean, the hell on earth, the rivers of blood, the screams, the incredible suffering he caused. And yet, David, as you know, if you were to ask him today, as many people have, to comment on his invasion of Iraq, you know what his exact words are, David? I have no regrets. It's unbelievable.
So let me ask you then, when we think about, and I know you want to get into the evidence, let me kind of frame that discussion in this way. I agree with you completely about the misleading case that was made to get us into that war. We know from public polling that many Americans ended up with the idea that there was a connection between Saddam Hussein and 9/11, a connection that didn't exist. We know all that. But my question is this. The defenders of George W. Bush, the reasonable ones at this point, would argue it was a case that had faulty intelligence, but Bush did not knowingly make a bad case. Colin Powell may have been responsible.
I'm going to get into that right now.
Okay, fair enough.
Right now.
Yeah.
Okay. The faulty intelligence was on weapons of mass destruction, but weapons of mass destruction are not the issue. The only issue, as I testified before Congress, was Iraq an imminent threat to security of this country. I mean, Pakistan has weapons of mass destruction. China does. Russia, England. Are we invading them? No. So the only issue is not weapons of mass destruction, but whether he was an imminent threat. And I don't know if you saw the DVD, but I point out very clearly there and in the book that he was not an imminent threat to the security of this country. Now let me give you some evidence to show that. He told two lies to the American public, Bush. The first lie was that Hussein was an imminent threat to the security of this country. The second lie, as you just indicated, David, he led people to believe that Hussein was involved in 9/11 with al-Qaeda. Not a speck of evidence to support that. With respect to the first lie, on October the 1st, 2002, the CIA sent to the White House its classified, top-secret national intelligence estimate report on Iraq. The report, David, was the consensus of all 16 federal intelligence agencies, including the CIA, of course. Page 8 of the report clearly says that Iraq was not an imminent threat to the security of this country. Yet unbelievably, and there's no other word to describe it, just 6 days later, on October the 7th, in Bush's first televised speech to the nation on the alleged Iraqi threat, he told millions of unsuspecting Americans the exact opposite of what his own CIA was telling him. Bush told Americans that Hussein was a, quote, great danger to our nation, unquote, either by his attacking us with his weapons of mass destruction or giving his weapons of mass destruction to some terrorist group to do so. He said this could happen, quote, on any given day, unquote. In other words, the threat was imminent. Now, let me take this further here because it deals with dates. So the classified report comes out October the 1st. 3 days later, October the 4th, the Bush administration issued an unclassified version of this classified report, one they could show to Congress and the American people. 7 days later, David, Congress was going to vote on a resolution whether to authorize Bush to go to war. And in this unclassified version, you may recall, David, it came to be called the White Paper.
Right.
The conclusion of U.S. intelligence that Hussein was not an imminent threat to security of this country was completely deleted.
Well, I think you lay the case out quite well, and people should absolutely check out the DVD and the book. In the limited time we have left, I would love to just ask you a couple of other things from your
Good.
storied career. Back in '86, you played the part of a prosecutor in this mock trial of Lee Harvey Oswald for the killing of John F. Kennedy. And I say this not in a negative way. You have, for some, become a sort of apologist for the official story around the assassination of John F. Kennedy.
An apologist.
And to be clear, I use that term.
It's bad, but I'm trying to make up for them. No.
I use that term not as an attack, but in the sense that you have gone out and said, actually, the Warren Commission report, the official story, does make sense. Is that a role you anticipated sort of being placed into when you participated in that mock trial?
I never, quote, would have prosecuted Oswald if I felt that he was innocent. So I had to do a lot of research first. It was a 5-month preparation for the trial. We had the original Warren Commission witnesses, a regular federal judge, regular federal jury, and the defense attorney had just been anointed by 60 Minutes, Jerry Spence, as being the top criminal defense attorney in the country. I hate to use the word mock because a mock trial is usually in law school and you have fellow students and it's for a couple hours. We were in trial for 21 hours. And I don't think you're aware. I can kind of tell by your question, and I don't blame you for not being aware. But I started working on a book back in '86, and it came out in 2007. And during the 50th anniversary of the Kennedy assassination, I was on national TV more than any other person. The book, Reclaiming History, The Assassination of President John F. Kennedy, is universally regarded, this is not a boast, all you have to do is look at the reviews, universally regarded as the definitive book on the Kennedy assassination.
Absolutely, and I am familiar with the book.
Oh, you are familiar with it? Yeah. Well, the reason it didn't sell too well, all my other true crime books, were either number one or very close, but the book is 1,650 pages. The endnotes are 1,000 pages. There's over 10,000 citations. It weighs about 7.5 pounds. And who buys books like that today? But yeah, I'm not an apologist. This is a very simple case. Oswald killed Kennedy and acted alone. But because of what these conspiracy theorists have done, all the allegations, they've transformed this simple case into the most complex murder case by far in world history. And I dealt with all of these issues in the book. You read the book, and there's nothing more that anyone would ever want to know, plus 100 things that you didn't even think about. So it covers the whole thing. It's an easy case. By the way, I just gave an interview in a documentary on the Warren Commission. The Warren Commission members are all dead, but the assistant consul, they view themselves as a part of the commission, and I understand why. Several of them are still alive, and they were interviewed, and I was the only non-commission member that was interviewed. It'll be coming out, I guess, in about a half a year. The majority of American people believe there was a conspiracy in this case, and the reason why is that's all they've heard for 50 years, conspiracy, conspiracy, conspiracy. I hate to quote Joseph Goebbels, the propaganda minister of Hitler's Third Reich, but he said, if you push something at someone long enough, eventually they're going to start buying it, particularly if they haven't been exposed to any contrary view.
And over the years, was there, and bearing in mind that I know, of course, that you believe the Lee Harvey Oswald acted alone story is accurate, was there ever a time when you heard, even if it's a small element of a conspiracy theory around that assassination, that at least made you say, I need to look into that further? That sounds like it may be something worth looking into. Was there ever a moment like that?
Actually, that moment came before I got on the case. The one thing that bothered me about this, I didn't know anything about the case. I made the assumption the Warren Commission probably is okay, but I certainly wasn't telling anyone that because I didn't know. The one thing that bothered me immediately is I had heard that the Warren Commission sealed its records for 75 years. And of course, the natural inference that people say, well, if you didn't have anything to hide, Why are you sealing the records? Well, it turns out they didn't seal the records. When Warren sent those documents that were not included in the report or the 26 supplementary volumes supporting the report, when he sent those documents to the National Archives for safekeeping, I was fortunate to get a hold of the cover letter. He specifically said, I hope these documents get the fullest public disclosure to the American people. The documents were, what's the word we're talking about? Sealed. The documents were sealed, but had nothing to do with Earl Warren or the Warren Commission. There's an old rule at the National Archives that when they get documents from a federal investigative agency, they seal them for 75 years, believed to be the normal lifespan of a human being. Though that rule, instruction number 5, has been completely eviscerated, as I'm talking to you right now, David, 99.9% of those documents have been made available to the American public because of the JFK Act in 1992 and the Freedom of Information Act, I think, in 1966. What about that 1/10 of 1%? Well, I have spoken to the head of the House Select Committee on Assassination and the Assassination Record Review Board. Both of them told me over the phone that their staffs looked at all of the documents, 100% of the documents, and there's no smoking gun in there, as the conspiracy theorists say. The smoking gun doesn't even make any sense. Look, any group that would have the incredible boldness and criminality to murder the President of the United States surely would have the lesser immorality to retrieve any incriminating document and dispose of it. By the way, that 1/10 of 1% is going to be released to the American public, I think, in 2017, October of 2017. But anyway, that did give me pause. I said, why are they sealing the records if there's nothing to hide? Other than that, everything points towards George Bush. The whole issue...
Towards Lee Harvey Oswald, rather.
George Bush, I'm sorry. I go from... After I took on the Kennedy thing, I took on Bush, and after that I took on God. I wrote my agnosticism book on God, so I got all these things jumbled in my mind, my alleged mind. But what was I going to say? And then
so you're satisfied at this point that conspiracy theorists really are not standing on solid footing of any kind?
No. I expose in my book their flawed logic, their intentional deceptions, but it's a religion with them. I mean, they go down to Dallas every year for convention. They have other conventions during the year. If they travel to another city in the country, they stay overnight at a fellow traveler's home. They subscribe to newsletters. And of course, I come out with a book like this, and basically I'm telling them that they've wasted the last 20, 30 years of their life. They're not going to like me about that, but it's a religion. It's never going to end. It's a bottomless pit. I put 20 years into it. I paid my dues, so now I'm going on to other stuff like Bush and God.
All right, we've been speaking with famed prosecutor Vincent Bugliosi, the film, The Prosecution of an American President, and of course the book, The Prosecution of George W. Bush for Murder. A true pleasure having you on. Thank you.